Hello and welcome to today's Environment and Energy Leader webinar sponsored by Grid Beyond, an intelligent energy as a service company. My name is Jessica Hunt, and on behalf of the entire team at E&E Leader, I welcome you to maximizing your energy strategy, the benefits of active participation. My questions specific to the presentation, as well as any technical issues, may be submitted through the Q&A widget, which is open already on your screen. We just ask that before you send any questions regarding technical issues that you do follow the steps located in the help widget at the bottom of your console. Please feel free to communicate with other participants today using the attendee chat widget. Let us know where you're from and why you decided to jump on with us today. As a reminder, if you are watching this on demand, you still have the ability to submit questions to the presenters. We will be recording today's presentation, so you can come back on within about 4 to 5 hours and rewatch it if you missed any information. Questions specific to the slide deck or any other resources, please direct to the team at Grid Beyond. They will be happy to answer anything that does come up in the slide deck. During today's event, attendees will have the opportunity to hear perspectives from subject matter experts on opportunities arising from charging energy markets, how businesses can become more resilient while earning revenues, and how AI energy technologies are a must for businesses that are looking to increase their competitive edge. We have set aside time, at the end of today's event for a Q&A session. Please submit all subject matter questions using the Q&A widget as previously stated. If we do not get a chance to answer your specific question before the end of today's event, a member of the team will follow up with you as soon as possible. And additionally, E&E Leader will be providing all attendees with a certificate of attendance for meeting specific viewing criteria. And at this point, I am going to hand the presentation over to Joe and Dino, because I think everyone has heard enough from me during this intro. So I will rejoin for the Q&A.
Thank you, Jess. And good day, everybody. It's noon here in Dallas, and I guess 1 o'clock where Dino is in the greater New York area. As luck would have it, you may hear some background noise. I've got window installers coming in, enhancing my energy efficiency utilization in my house. This is a second trip back to the house after the first one was done about 3 months ago, and it's been really hard and difficult to get these guys scheduled, but we should be okay. Appreciate your time today as we embark upon, what has been the transformation that's occurring with the utility grids here and around, the world. And Grid Beyond is uniquely positioned to share, I think, some learnings that we've had, having cut our teeth in the UK and in Ireland, where we're from. Having expanded globally into other markets across the world, now in Japan and Australia. I live in Dallas, in Texas, have grown up here. We are a unique island as well, from the standpoint we're not surrounded by water, but ERCOT is surrounded by, I'd like to say, our native ego. We're firewalled against everyone else around North America and operate like we are on an island. And so that, dynamic has been really learned and challenged to the degree of what kind of conditions you see in tying together and interoperating between the generation community and the user community, in making the grid as efficient as possible, while adopting wind and solar resources into as much as possible in this pursuit to net zero and carbon reductions. So what is the predicament that we're currently in? And, if we were in a situation where we were to go completely wind and solar and not have any other generation assets on the grid, our grid generation supply line would look something like that EKG line in yellow. And the blue line, of course, is your demand line. And your demand line is where you would be finding yourself without power many times during the day as wind and solar gets disrupted or interrupted based on certain conditions. And of course, until we have batteries to fill the gap, this would be the kind of scenario. Now, obviously, we're obviously somewhere between an extreme example of this and where we're at today, utilizing gas assets, coal plants as well, of course, batteries to a certain degree, DERs as well. But this is kind of the dynamic that we're addressing and dealing with. And so I like to look at the grid as kind of an analogy. We'll be talking, kind of basing a lot of our conversation off. The grid is like a room in a sinking ship, and the room in the ship is filling up with water. And so water is the demand that's occurring day to day, and it throttles up and down. It throttles based on extreme weather conditions during various weather patterns. It may throttle based on usage, patterns on the demand side of the equation. And the ceiling in the room never moved 4, 5, 6 years ago. I mean, it barely, if it all moved at all. And so these RTOs, or these electric utility operators or independent system operators, we're focused on how to maintain resiliency by throttling and watching those water levels. And incentives were developed, programs were developed to incentivize users to be responsive to when the water levels rise too close to the level of where the ceiling is, because that tests the resiliency, reliability, volatility of the grid. And now what we're challenged with, and what Dina will go into, is what's affecting the ceiling in this room, and why does this ceiling tend to move, and what are the challenges that are occurring around it. And as a user, you're somewhere in between where the water level is and where the ceiling is, depending on what your electricity commodity contract is. If it's fixed, you certainly don't have a lot of worries here because you're protected. You've locked in. The risks are with the utility or the retail electric provider. If you're on an index price contract, well, then this should get your attention. If you're on a block and index, this should really get your attention. Because not only are we trying to deal with maintaining resiliency around the electricity grid, we're also looking at what are the economic opportunities around these programs. And I just used ERCOT as an example of this room, if you will. And these programs, are valued anywhere from $65 to $115 to $150,000 a megawatt a year. You may be able to even stack multiple programs together in an offering to participate in helping the ERCOT grid, if you will, or the RTO where you reside, maintain that resiliency and reliability of the grid. And of course, depending on your company and what your operation is, depending on your profit margins, a $90,000 demand response program that asks you voluntarily on your load and on your flexibility to pause your business, for just a few hours every so many years, depending on when we see the water in the room getting too close to the ceiling, or when the ceiling and the water come close together. If you'll dispatch and pause your business for an hour or two, a business operating on a 1% profit margin, that's equivalent to $9 million of top line revenue growth, or equivalent to that. If it's a 5% profit margin business, about 1.8 million. If it's a 10% profit margin business, about $900,000. So these can be significantly huge, impactful revenue impacts to your companies as you position these. The question of whether or not you can interrupt or pause your business for just a very brief period of time in order to help the grid, but also to help yourselves financially. And so you're seeing fixed price contracts as, being 2 or 3x what they were 3, 4, 5 years ago. How do you position that within your organizations in your power spend? Why is it happening? And that's what we want to cover here today. So Dino, pass it on to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. Well, hopefully we'll teach folks how to swim today and maybe give them a few tools to make sure that they don't drown. So thank you. My name is Dino Damascus. I head up our market strategy group at Grid Beyond. And so why don't we jump into strategy? So, with strategy, the first thing you think about is, what are the objectives? That's really where you should start. What do I want to accomplish? So you can see here, we've taken what we've learned and sort of condensed it down to what I'll call 3 key strategies. The first being energy costs. And that could include new strategies such as batteries being installed at your site. So it's sort of a broad energy cost related items. The second is security, and this could include reliability. What and how do you use electricity? What's the priorities for you in terms of outages? Outages could include both local as well as sort of system-wide issues and the challenges associated with basically preventing or minimizing those. And the third strategy objective is typically sustainability. And that's typically driven by your corporate office in terms of their goals and expectations. So once you've defined a strategy, objectives, if you would, the next thing really that we see is what I'll call education, and making sure that the customer understands the dynamics that are happening in the market and how those dynamics relate to some of the strategies that we're recommending. I think it's very important to note, if you would, that the customer, there's different levels in a customer's organization. So you may be dealing with an energy manager that's very familiar with the market, but they may need to sell internally to others that may not be as knowledgeable. So providing sort of a foundation and an education, I think, really does help the project move from the ground to success. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about in terms of dynamics is the energy transition. So you can see on the left, there's a chart showing the various fossil fuels coming offline, et cetera. What we're seeing today is renewables coming online. They're really underpinning the new grid. As an example, Texas has about 30 gigawatts of wind now that are online. That's about 25% of their generation fleet, if you would. You've got solar coming on. I think they're still somewhere in the 4 to 5 range, but that's quickly growing. And I think with some of the things going on, such as the Inflation Reduction Act that the U.S. Government passed back in August of last year, that's only going to accelerate the transition from fossil fuel to renewables. So let's move on to the next issue, which is in challenge, which is reliability. Oops, sorry, let me do that back. Let me do that. There we go. Thank you. So from a reliability perspective, really what you're looking at here is weather-related items for the most part, although there are a few non-weather-related items. And those could be local, right? So you could have voltage reductions that impact brownouts, et cetera. For the most part, it's weather-related. And the weather, obviously, those instabilities in the marketplace are going to continue to grow. You're going to see more and more extreme events. We've seen them last year in PJM with Storm Elliott. 2 years ago, it was Uri in Texas. Significant events, significant price events, significant outages, et cetera. So you're going to just see those continue to grow. It's very important that the customer understand what the cost of these outages mean to them. So, we find sort of I'll say as a starting point that if a customer is able to articulate in any fashion what an outage means to them, it's probably important to them, right? So if they understand the number of events that happen and what the impact is on the facility, then that's probably a key strategy goal that we need to focus on. You can see here that there's some estimates in terms of sort of generic numbers are really associated with data centers, hospitals, pharma. Pharma obviously has a huge impact in terms of outages on pharma, I should say, glass, et cetera. So we've got a lot of familiarity with these market sectors, and we've done a lot of work there and have a pretty good handle on what that means to them. Next up, the next two slides really deal with energy. And really with energy, there's two aspects to it. There's both the cost in terms of the actual relative price, as well as the volatility associated with it, meaning the range that you could see in any given day. So from a cost perspective, we're seeing, obviously, if you looked at 21 versus 22, you would see a significant increase in the overall price of electricity, somewhere in the sort of anywhere from 50 to 100%. Volatility, though, really happens on a daily basis, or can happen on a daily basis. And you can see with the graph on the left-hand side the projections associated with volatility. And what you'll notice, obviously, is the more where the renewables are coming offline. So the morning startup as well as the evening sort of shutdown, where you see solar coming off, for example, and potentially wind in some cases, you're going to see more volatility. So you really need to think about, how do I use electricity and when do I use electricity? And the when's going to become more and more important. And it's really going to be more of a daily as opposed to seasonal. You know, traditionally, summers are higher than winter, costs are higher in the summer than the winter. Now it's, excuse me, now it's the case where, you know, the morning is very expensive. The afternoon, in theory, could actually almost go negative depending on how much solar and wind come online in some of these markets. Then obviously the shutdown in the afternoon, or where businesses shut down, you see a growth or a spike there, with solar coming offline. Joe touched on this a little earlier. This talks about volatility. In particular, we're talking about hedging strategies. Understanding the customer's commodities structure and their commodity agreement is really critical. And also understanding how you might be able to impact that in a positive manner. A lot of the strategies that we recommend have a net positive benefit to the commodity provider, meaning we're taking risk off the table. The more risk that you can take off the table, the cheaper the price is, then the more stability that you can get provided from an energy perspective. So they work hand in glove. And so it's really very important that you understand what the commodity agreement looks like today, and then what it could look like based on the recommendations that we're making from a strategy perspective. So just to recap the drivers, we've talked about all of these, I think. You've got renewables that are growing, and they're going to continue to grow. Plant retirements are coming. You see them every day. The market reforms are happening in many markets. For example, the DER issue that FERC is pushing or has pushed is coming to fruition. Enabling technologies are continuing to grow, in particular batteries. And the Inflation Reduction Act, that's the US version of it. There's also a Canadian version of it that's going to be coming in online. And then there is something, I think, in the EU that might be coming online. I've heard rumors of that, though I haven't really done much research on it since I'm focused on North America. So participation is key, right? You need to understand the how and the when. How do I use electricity, and when am I using it? And understand what's important to you in terms of your goals. Is it reliability? Is it cost? Is it sustainability? Is it all of the above? And then focus on coming up with a strategy that makes sense for you. And that's really the how. And so we'll transition it back to Joe to walk us through the how.
Thanks, Dino. So, we covered what are the dynamics occurring with the grids and its transformations that's occurring around the world. How the approach that maybe you took 5 years ago, 3 years ago in your energy procurement wasn't challenged based on the previous 3, 4, 5, 6 years prior to that. But certainly what we've seen is a significant change in the challenges around this transformation. And the question is how do you navigate through these changes, and to what extent are the pain points going to increase or impact your business to operate profitably as prices continue to rise, and prices of course tie into volatility. So the question is, how do you participate? What's the process to follow in how you do that? And a company like ourselves, we come from a controls background, and that controls background has enabled us to identify, what are the return on investment results from retrofitting certain elements of your process, your manufacturing, the way you operate your business. And so it's assessing, understanding how and where automation can impact the ability to identify flexibility is key. And these ISOs, independent system operators, ERCOTs, PJMs, ISOs, North America, they're obviously called different things in other parts around the world. They're equal opportunity megawatt harvesters. And so they're trying to harvest whatever flexibility, whatever non-critical loads you may have operating in your business to bring to bear for when the water's rising too high in the room. And so an assessment and automation and an access of what that flexibility and how that can be monetized is the key, without affecting your core business, of course, which is to operate what you do every single day. If you're not operating at 100% capacity, you have the ability to identify and find flexibility. You have the ability to bypass moments when prices are peaking. If you're exposed to a real-time price index, or when those prices are peaking, it's because demand is and supply is constrained. And so these three A's that we approach here is showing what the difference is today versus, say, was in approaching that and finding that flexibility, which was not so much of a challenge years ago, but is now because the monetization values have increased so significantly. So, can you implement intelligent control? Where can you find, controllable, flexible, non-critical load? Can you sub-meter your site so that you're identifying and isolating those critical versus non-critical, flexible versus flexible loads? What are the asset constraints that you're operating under? With automation, in a PLC that interfaces with your on-site operations, duplicating your process for shutdown, you're duplicating your process for safety protocols, duplicating your process for maintaining a shutdown that doesn't impact work in process materials. Those are all things that take into consideration, a reasonable and acceptable level of going down this path of identifying these megawatts to be harvested that the ITO, the RTO, or the ISO are willing to pay for. And then how do you maximize those revenues based on that optimization that's found in that flexibility? And as this transformation continues to evolve, we add more wind and solar to the grid. We add the potential for more disruptions and interruptions. The grid operators are going to be paying greater incentives for you as an end user to be available in a shorter period of time to pause your business when these constraints and these peak supply and demand volatility conditions arise. And so that's a process that we follow that's different. We touched on this earlier about, what is your commodity contract? If you're under a fixed contract price, the water in the room is not an issue for you because the risks are not yours. The risks are being borne by the grid operator and by the commodity or the retail electric providers. But if you are looking to, say, take more risk, take on more management of where those opportunities are to reduce that cost for power, and go into a block and index or an index type contract, the ability to integrate your user profiles, your load profiles of how you operate your business with grid conditions that evolve, grid conditions that change, with the ability to, for example, we'll get into more of this, forecast when potential hours are going to be higher and peak in, say, a day ahead market, and how to plan for reducing or preparing for those hours and avoiding that exposure that eventually would allow you to lower your overall energy costs. These are the kind of strategies that will impact your ability to really address bottom line financial issues, as well as driving towards helping with us reduce our carbon footprint and our pursuit to net zero. I think we're 25 minutes into it, so we welcome to take a few questions here before proceeding on. But just this last slide is, where is the value added? It's identifying where that flexibility is in your loads, and then monetizing that to what the grid operator is willing to pay for how quickly you can be available, for how long you can be available. And certainly, where this comes into play outside of just your typical load is adding batteries into the equation. And we'll be talking about batteries here in a minute as well.
Great. No, thank you. I want to thank the attendees for actively participating in today's event so far. We'll go through maybe 2 or 3 questions now and then save the rest for the end of the event, just to make sure we have enough time to get through all of the material. Earlier, you mentioned figuring out how to come up with or putting together a strategy that's best for your organization. What if you don't know where to start? Will Grid Beyond help us come up with a strategy or strategies that are best for our specific organization?
Yes, touched on it in an overall, just very high level aspect of our process. But our approach is we have an idea based on certain verticals, on multiple verticals, what traditional flexibility or amount of flexibility is available. But obviously each operation and each company is different. And so, first thing is to match up what we think are maybe historical flexibility that can be identified based on your particular niche of which you operate in. Tie that into what is the RTO or the ISO's programs that align with your business operation. Not all programs are aligned with all operational profiles, not all company-based profiles, but there is programs out there that typically can align with your unique way you operate. We can do an indicative proposal around what that value is from a monetary basis, explore those issues around what it takes to temporarily pause when these conditions arise, when the water's getting too close to the ceiling, wherever the ceiling may have dropped in this analogy I keep referring to. And then from there, if that looks like something that's worth taking further action, we'll do a site visit, assess your operational characteristics, identify where we can distinguish between flexible and non-flexible, critical versus non-critical loads. And once we summarize what that load level looks like, we can tie that into what the values are that the local utility operator is willing to pay you for giving them that voluntary level of flexibility that you're willing to hand over to them. And essentially what this is an insurance policy. They're buying an insurance policy from you to take action sometime in the future when supply and demand get very, very tight and we got concerns about potentially having to go into brownouts or blackouts. We avoid those by utilizing voluntary levels of load like yourselves here and participating in the program, getting paid for it year in and year out at some point in time into the future where a condition may arise where supply and demand are getting to the point where they got to get help from people like yourself. You're the last bastions of resource to help the grid maintain resiliency when they call you. They don't call you very often, but when they do, it's because you're critically needed.
Hey, Joe, I would just add, just from a base sort of foundation perspective, I think 2 things that come to mind for me is one is if you don't have an understanding of what the strategy could look like, if it's really helpful to have, number one, hourly data available. So if you have your usage data and you can get that from your local utility, understanding how to use electricity on an hourly basis or what the volume is really helps us understand the scheduling as well as sort of the dynamics within the plant. And to the extent possible, if you've got any type of list of equipment on site, whether that's compressors, arc furnace, I mean, whatever equipment you have, large pieces of electric equipment, having that list available also gives us a good foundation for what and how you're using electricity today between those two items.
That definitely makes sense. Now, this question kind of piggybacks on this, but you mentioned it earlier too. It has to do with weather events. And I think we've all experienced how the climate is changing. I know last year in Maryland, we had a 74-degree day, and then the next day we got 14 inches of snow. So things are, things are I feel like rapidly changing, and there's definitely things we can do as a whole. As Joe, you mentioned earlier, you're getting more energy efficient windows. We have solar on our house now, so we produce all of the energy that we use within our home, which is really nice, and then send it to the grid. But This question, as I get back to weather events, how can industries really keep up with the increasing weather events impacting grid reliability and energy costs?
I'll take the first part here, and Dina, if you want to chime in. I think where you keep up is in the process that we're talking about here and participating in helping the grid maintain, or the ability for the grid overall to keep up. We all know there's good reasons to go with wind and add wind and solar. And in fact, when that resource is abundant, there's nothing cheaper in when and how to produce electricity. The challenge is when there gaps occur, the supply chain gets disrupted, if you will. Mother Nature decides the sun's not going to shine today, or the wind's not going to blow. What happens then? And we can't afford to have coal plants standing by that can operate in just about any type of weather condition, or gas plants as prices are rising on that front, to be available for these rare moments, or these moments that occur where this volatility takes place, and the prices rise as a result of it. So what do you do to keep up? You prepare, you understand a process, and you put a protocol in place around incentives that are paid by the RTO or the ISO to be available if needed when these weather events or these conditions occur. DERs, of course, are a really, really phenomenal way to control your own destiny. The edge-based investments in batteries, for example, which we put in on our dime as a service that provide you that resiliency, allow for sharing of revenues as prices rise. Best time to discharge the batteries when prices are really, really low. In ERCOT, for example, prices are even upside down at times when the wind's blowing and the grid's paying you to take power off the grid. So you're getting paid to charge your batteries, say, during phases at night, and discharging during phases of high expense during the day. These are the kind of steps you can take that GridBeyond can help navigate and help you guide you into essentially controlling your destiny with edge-based generation resources that fill the gaps when Mother Nature decides otherwise, but then monetize that opportunity with getting greater resiliency and the ability to share in that volatile kind of equation that occurs when peak prices occur.
And I would just add actually two things from my experience. One of them is we had a data center, or a customer that had large number of data centers. It was a bank or financial institution. And one of the interesting things that they shared with me is one of the reasons, or one of the key reasons, that they were participating in, for example, a demand response program, was the market intelligence, if you would, that they were receiving. And by that, I mean, they felt that if by participating in the demand response program, they were getting some insights as to where the grid was and what type of instabilities, if any, were out there. And so to them, it was sort of a canary in the coal mine, that if they saw, issues coming along related to demand response programs were potentially going to be called, those insights allowed them to basically do a managed transition, if you would, to backup power, for example. So they saw it as a sort of market intel. And the second item I'd mention is we had several customers in the past where we would provide sort of what I call a market update to them. So typically it's a customer that has sort of a national footprint. They're interested in understanding sort of the dynamics of the market, where it's going. And so we would provide sort of what I'll call a regulatory update. But that could be anything from program changes coming down the line to, hey, we're hearing about something, a new program coming on in Texas, or we're hearing that, there's going to be grid reliability, concerns in New Jersey, for example. So these updates really gave them sort of some additional insights and allowed them to, make some planning changes going forward.
All great information. I know we are getting additional questions in. I think at this point we should probably jump back into the presentation, and if we have some more time at the end, we'll answer any questions. And I've let the audience know if we don't get a chance to answer your question today, that Joe, you, or Dina will follow up with them.
certainly.
Joe, are you finished it?
Yeah, Dino.
All right. So this is quite an eye chart, if you would. There's a lot of information, a lot of good information on this graph. I guess for me, there's really three takeaways that I'd want to make sure you folks understood. Number one, that although we talk about things such as like capacity and ancillary services, and there's discussions sort of in all of the different various ISOs, it really is local knowledge that you need to have in order to decide whether and if you're going to participate in some of these programs. There's enough distinct issues and uniqueness about each of them. So it's really about having the local information. So that's number one. Number two, there's lots of opportunities in just about every ISO or RTO, and you can see them listed here. I'm not sure that we've got there's what I'll call more of the retail side of the business. So in some cases, there are programs available through the local utility that basically supplement or can be added on to what's happening at the sort of the wholesale level, at the ISO level, the independent system operators. So that's number two, that there's plenty of opportunities in every one of these districts. And number three is stacking. There's opportunities to stack revenue and really participate in multiple programs simultaneously. Now, that may mean that you're in two programs and you decide on a day ahead basis, for example, if I'm going to be in program number one for hour number 10, hour ending 10, and program number 2 for hour ending 11. So there's some transition going on there. So they're not stacked in a vertical manner, but a horizontal manner, but that allows you to maximize the value from each of those programs. And that leads me to my final comment on this slide, which is, as it says, AI and machine learning. So machine learning automation is really critical when you start stacking. There's really no way to effectively utilize these resources and optimize the resource strategy without being able to do so through automation and sort of machine learning. So let me move on and give you maybe an example. So we'll talk about one market. So this is PJM. So a simple strategy could be just participate in the capacity market, right? So that could be either through the market CP program, which is a forward capacity market, or through PLC management, which you can do on a year-to-year basis. Both of them effectively get you a capacity benefit, if you would. And you can then sort of take a next step, if you would, and think about adding sync reserve and potentially energy market index management. Sync reserve is nice because in this market, you get paid for being available. So it's not about having to be on and operating, meaning you actually reduce the load. It's just being available. You're getting paid for that availability. Again, it's an insurance policy, as Joe mentioned earlier. The last one there, the energy market index management, is really taking advantage of market knowledge to say, okay, at hours, 10 o'clock today, 10 a.m., let's just say through noon, prices are going to be high based on our forward projections, our forecast. You're better off not utilizing the flexible load during those hours. So that does require you to shut things down, but we're not talking about a huge number of hours. In this example, we're talking about basically 20 hours of the highest priced hours during the year. The nice thing about this management tool is that it gives you the flexibility to set your own parameters, meaning if your strike price is $200, that's going to mean X number of hours of off time. If you decide to go to 500, obviously that's going to be fewer hours. And in the reverse case, or going down the stack, if you decide to set it at 100 hours, it's always going to mean more hours. But that flexibility gives you the opportunity to make the decision. And you can change that as you go forward, meaning, let's say for July, you set it at 200, for August, it's 500, and so on down the line. So those are some very nice tools available that we have. The last one, two items, I guess. One is Reg A and D. That's mainly focused on batteries just because of the speed. So So if you do have batteries, you would definitely want to take advantage of that. And then the last thing, and I mentioned this several times, the Inflation Reduction Act, just to put some numbers to it, there's potential there of anywhere from 30 to 70% of the capital cost of an energy storage device. So you're talking about significant revenue, or I should say cost reduction. It's given in the form of investment tax credits. So there is some complexity to that you have to take care of. And the 30 to 70, 30 is what I call sort of a base number that's it's associated with prevailing wage and internships, basically. So I think most people can achieve that, and that's why I put the base at 30. 70 is taking advantage of things like domestic sourced materials, tribal land, energy communities. I mean, there's a sort of a stack of opportunities in sort of the 10% range that go from 30 to 70. Not all folks are going to be able to achieve those. They might be able to achieve one or two of them, but it is potential. You know, the potential is to get up to 70.
Great, thanks, Dino. So going to this transition again, where the question is, how can companies, how can yourselves get in front of what's happening? Well, one of the ways is we're talking about here is the monetization values of being in a faster response program. The quicker you can respond, the quicker your assets can be available. The more money that the RTO or the ISO is willing to pay. Dino was touching on a PJM example of multiple programs being stacked together. You can see here that in an example with ERCOT, it's currently almost $300,000 a megawatt a year based on the ability to, say, do multiple programs, such as 4CP, and during the summer, the ability to avoid real-time price avoidance based on a price point you'd establish that says, I don't want to operate my business when the price of electricity gets to a certain point. Do I have any clairvoyance or forecast, awareness of when that's going to take place? That would be a huge value to me if I knew I could avoid high prices when they may occur. And then, of course, the traditional DR programs that reward you anywhere from being available within a 10-minute or a 30-minute phone call from the RTO that says, hey, we need you today because, we've got an issue in the room. So, the monetization value is there. And I touched on this earlier. Our pedigree is, we've operated on islands. We're operating in ERCOT. It's an island. The premise and the challenge of an island-based environment is how to maintain the grid's reliability, coordinating as deeply as you can between the user community and the generation community. And so what does that look like? Well, it looks like, one, having really good forecast information. And so pricing or forecast models that give us hourly based forecasts of what's going to happen to the grid condition. Is supply and demand going to get tight? Does that tightness reflect higher prices? What do those prices look like as far as what it's going to impact as far as hourly production schedules? If you can align those things together, you've got a more effective grid equation, if you will, that gives you greater reliability and resiliency for all. And so that's where Grid Beyond comes into play, is tying in those market forecasts with those hourly outlooks that says this is when you should be available to pause. This is when you should make your power available to, say, hedge. What does your energy supply agreement look like that you can take advantage of the monetary values around that, knowing that this is what's going to happen tomorrow. And again, I touched on this, if you're not operating at 100% capacity, then you've got the ability to prepare for these kind of dynamics that are occurring when these conditions arise or are forecasted in the grid. So, and here's an example. I mean, this is, of course, a batch, process kind of a scenario. But if you knew what the hours, say, between 9 and 11 tomorrow were going to be higher, and you're not operating at 100% capacity, you've got the ability to pre-do something. You can pre-cool, you can preheat, you can pre-produce, you can accelerate or boost some type of operation that allows you to prepare for a time when prices are going to be high, and then ride those higher prices out during that phase of which we can provide the forecast data, and then once that passes, then continue on with your operation, having avoided those peak prices. And those models are becoming more and more sophisticated. It's certainly where AI comes into play. Um, for us as a company, we monitor about 70 different data points that are occurring within the grid, and those data points are giving us that outlook that says, when do we think or anticipate there's going to be high prices? And if we know when those high prices are going to occur and you're not operating your business at 100% capacity, as I touched on, you've got the ability to shift or adjust to when prices are low, avoid when prices are high, and be able to take advantage of that through monetary opportunities that the grid will provide. And these were 2 days last in 2021 where there was an example of this occurring, that just by aligning to when these forecasts are being dispatched with some preparation on your scheduling of whatever operational schedule you operate on as a business, you can take full advantage of these and combine with the peak predictor tools, the 4CP or coincidental peak programs. 4CP is what it's called in ERCOT. 5CP is what it's called in PJM. In Canada or Ontario, it's called global adjustment. The ability to accurately hit those peaks when they're called is critical, because you've got to operate your core business, of course. And to give you an example of how effective the AI platform is on our front, last year in PJM, we dispatched the 5CP program 6 times at 2 hours of dispatch and hit all 5. So there were not multiple dispatches that occurred where, as an operation, you're pausing your business trying to get this tariff relief that's available for this program because you couldn't understand or know when these hours or these peaks were going to occur. We called 5 out of 6 out of just 6 dispatches last year. That's the power of AI. That's the power of understanding and being able to tie in together these many data points that are impacting the dynamics of the grid. Now, this is the intimacy between the grid and the user community. If you add batteries to the mix, now all of a sudden you've got more breathing room to be able to take advantage of those conditions. And those batteries give you the opportunity to arbitrage the energy spikes that occur while giving you resiliency, and while being able to give you the ability to ride through these, what we're seeing and what we're pointing to here is this changing grid conditions, how to navigate through greater volatility and greater price swings as a result of that volatility. And of course, batteries at the edge, batteries at your site is a way to make that happen. And what Grid Beyond will do is we will deploy and install the batteries on our expense. We will share those revenue opportunities that you get from arbitraging those batteries. That gets you resiliency and gives you the ability to ride through any or protect yourself from some of that volatility that occurs. And at the same time, having a very secure power future, because at edge-based generation, edge-based backup power is where we certainly see the future and where everyone needs to control their destinies. So how is this modeled based on funding these batteries? So, like I said, we put the batteries in on our dime. We know the technologies, we know the suppliers. We've managed the supply chain around maybe what you've heard has been long-term horizons for battery delivery. We're already doing this and have been doing this in the UK and Ireland, and have expanded that around the world. And then we'll manage those batteries. Again, taking advantage of the market volatility by arbitraging the price swings, but also, of course, managing those batteries based on what the manufacturer's recommendations are, because these are long-term, power agreements. These occur over a great and long period of time. And that results in, if managed appropriately and accurately and successfully, critical load resiliency for your operation, and a chance for making, receiving revenue as a result of making, which is a very small investment on your part when funded by somebody like Grid Beyond. So tying in those platforms, this controls background that Grid Beyond brings to this sector, the intimacy of tying in the user's flexibility, identifying that critical versus non-critical loads that are then rewarded by participating in these programs that the grid operators need. This is where this all comes together, and does so with a very, a much less volatile scenario than what we're seeing with just the grid being able to provide power on its own. Batteries are the key. Batteries are the future, and batteries are where, and our controls tied together is where that really provides a very stable energy future with the opportunity to monetize these factors that we're seeing occurring as the grid continues on its forward path in transformation. So there's multiple opportunities here with the approach and direction that we help you navigate through. You're consolidating your energy management, you're optimizing for revenue savings, in the monetization opportunities that the grid is providing with these faster and quicker and programs that are rewarding that flexibility, tying all that into recognizing that you've got to run your core business. So we make sure we're not impacting or interrupting any aspects around what and how you operate your business. We duplicate your shutdown protocols for safety, for shutdown protocols for work in process. We tie all that into a very detailed integration between these grid programs and how you operate. And again, as long as you're not operating at 100% capacity, you've got the ability to take advantage of fully leveraging these monetization opportunities around a configuration like an edge-based battery deployment. I think we got just a couple more slides here, and actually we can touch on a couple of quick case studies here, and then we'll finish up with some questions, Jess, if that makes sense.
That definitely works for me. I was going to suggest the same thing.
Great. Okay. So a couple of examples, where we have deployed, solutions around, the opportunities on addressing the volatility in the grid, but also tying that into monetization opportunities. In this particular example, with CMEC, we put in for an aluminum smelter that was powered by a hydroelectric plant. There was 40 megawatts of energy flexibility that we monetized, that resulted in optimized operations with the ability to track the reduction in carbon that was resulting in utilizing more carbon-friendly hours, if you will, of generation on the grid versus heavy carbon-based hours of carbon content. Monitoring and reporting for that data and tracking it, and fully financed it up front as far as its deployment on the batteries. And then Smurfit Kappa, again, another example of what impacts we were able to have with 2 CHPs that they have on site. We identified 3.5 megawatts of capacity that was able to participate, which developed a new revenue stream for them, and obviously improved a lot of the elements around where and how they've been able to impact their carbon reductions, and also be able to address future-proof that for flexibility and remove some of the volatility issues around the grid. And then finally, Breaks and Cisco. These is a cold storage operation that deliver over 1 million cases every single day. We deployed this in the UK as well. It was a project that was around automation of fast-acting DR programs with peak avoidance and energy optimization. So there was a stacked kind of approach that we took that we touched on earlier in PJM and ERCOT. That stacking resulted essentially in them being able to monetize around $300,000 of annual project returns. Again, if you take that into what the profit margin is of your operation, the top line revenue impact of being able to pause for a few of these different programs in the course of a year, significant amount of top line revenue equal impact by deploying, a program along these lines. And that identified 3 megawatts in these programs. And as I said, it resulted in about 300,000 pounds in annual project returns. So I think with that, we can wrap up and at least takeaways on covering some of your additional questions that anybody may have before we finish up here at the top of the hour.
That sounds great. And just wanted to let the audience know that we do have over 50 countries represented today in terms of our registrants for this event. So it's one of the reasons I'm going to jump into this question that came in a little bit earlier, which was, is Grid Beyond considering the Global South market?
I'm sorry, the global what?
The Global South market. So in South America, Africa, and I think some Asian countries. Yeah.
We've been expanding pretty rapidly over the last, I would say, 3 years. We made the jump from the UK and Ireland, about right before COVID hit. And of course, that really put the brakes on global expansion plans. We've gone really accelerated our growth and expansion really beginning of the start of last year. Where we've expanded North America, we've certainly moved into Canada at the beginning of this year, Japan and Australia. I would say what markets we end up going to next will depend on the dynamics of where the economics are. Because there are some demand response programs and operators in the North America market, for example, where there's not volatility, there's not a stress between supply and demand, and as a result, there's not huge economic value around flexibility. So we have to choose our markets carefully based on where we think the economics justify the investment, and that's an ongoing evaluation that we're looking at continuously.
It's something that is evolving and will change over the next 5 to 10 years and beyond as well. I think we're going to do one more question before we wrap it up. Earlier, you mentioned the establishment of, or DR participation. Does DR participation require the establishment of baselines? And if yes, how are the baselines established?
So short answer is typically yes. So the baseline is used for what they call measurement and verification. So basically verifying that your performance. That varies by product or program, if you would. So in some cases, it looks back 10 days. It does a very sophisticated calculation. In other cases, for example, with PJM, it simply looks at your PLC value, your peak load contribution value from a capacity perspective. So there's 101 different ways of doing it. You really need to get down to the specifics of the program. But for the most part, the short answer is yes, they all have it. But B, it depends on the program. And we definitely can help with that. And that's obviously one of the first things we look at when we consider a new program.
In the first place, we look at your utility bill, or we ask for a letter of authorization from your utility to take a look at what your baseline user profile data is. And that establishes a baseline of what you continuously operate on. And then the grid operator wants to know if you can drop whatever you voluntarily drop to or drop by, depending on your operation. That's where we can capture into what the monetary value is based on the programs the grid operator is willing to provide. So we can assess, and then we can and certainly provide some guidance there on what the monetary values could be.
Well, this has been a great hour of information, and I'm sorry to the attendees that we weren't able to get to all of the questions that came in. We had over 20 questions submitted during over the past hour. So great to see the active participation. Joe and Dino, thank you for all the work you put into today's event, as well as Gabby for helping organize everything. Again, attendees, this event is going to be available on demand, so feel free to jump back on, rewatch it, take some notes if you were just here listening this time. At this point, we are going to conclude the webinar, and thank you again to the team from Grid Beyond, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks. Thanks, Jess. Thanks for all your help.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah. And for anyone else on the call, you can go to our website. There's a 20-minute session you can book to get an evaluation done along the things we talked about and touched on. If we didn't get to your questions, please take that route to get in touch with us. We'll be glad to help.
Excellent. Thank you for that little extra bit of information. And at this point, I'm going to end the webinar. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.